King Ban abruptly sat on a wooden chair inlaid with ivory. 60! I had hoped for 300, and for Arthur himself. You look very young to be a captain of men, he said dubiously. Then suddenly brightened. Did I hear correctly? Did you say you can write? Yes, Lord. And read? He insisted anxiously. Indeed, Lord King. You see, Blethig, the king cried in a triumphant voice as he sprang from the chair. Some warriors can read and write. It doesn't unman them. It does not reduce them to the petty status of clerks, women, kings, or poets, as you so fondly believe. Ha! A literate warrior! Do you, by any happy chance, write poetry? He asked me. No, Lord. How sad. We are a community of poets. We are a brotherhood. We call ourselves the Fili, and poetry is our stern mistress. It is, you might say, a sacred task. Maybe you'll be inspired. Come with me, my learned Derval. Ban, Arthur's absence forgotten, scurried excitedly across the room, beckoning me to follow through a second set of great doors and across another small room, where a second harpist, half naked like the first and just as beautiful, touched her strings, and then into a great library. I had never seen a proper library before, and King Ban, delighted to show the room off, watched my reaction. I gaped. And no wonder, for scroll after scroll was bound in ribbon and stored in custom-made open-ended boxes that stood one on top of the other like the cells of a honeycomb. There were hundreds of such cells, each with its own scroll and each cell labelled in a carefully inked hand. "What languages do you speak, Derval?" Ban asked me. "Saxon, Lord, and British." "Ah." He was disappointed. "Rude tongues only. I now have a command of Latin, Greek, British, of course, and some small Arabic. Father Selwyn there speaks 10 times as many languages. Isn't that so, Selwyn?" The king spoke to the library's only occupant, an old white-bearded priest with a grotesquely humped back and a black monkish cowl. The priest raised a thin hand in acknowledgment, but did not look up from the scrolls that were weighted down on his table. I thought for a moment that the priest had a fur scarf draped about the back of his monk's hood. Then I saw it was a grey cat that lifted its head, looked at me, yawned, then went back to sleep. King Ban ignored the priest's rudeness, and instead conducted me past the racks of boxes and told me about the treasures he had collected. "What I have here," he said proudly, "is anything the Romans left, and anything my friends think to send me. Some of the manuscripts are too old to handle any more, so those we copy. Let's see now, what's this? Ah, yes, one of Aristophanes' 12 plays. I have them all, of course. This one is The Babylonians, a comedy in Greek, young man." "Not at all funny," the priest snapped from his table. "And mightily amusing," King Ban said, unruffled by the priest's rudeness, to which he was evidently accustomed. "Maybe the Fili should build a theatre and perform it," he added. This you'll enjoy. Horace's Ars Poetica. I copied this one myself." "No wonder it's illegible," Father Selwyn interjected. "I make all the Fili study Horace's maxims," the king told me. "Which is why they're such execrable poets," the priest put in, but still did not look up from his scrolls. Tertullian." The king slid a scroll from its box and blew dust from the parchment. "A copy of his Apologeticus." "All rubbish," Selwyn said. "Waste of precious ink." "Eloquence itself," Ban enthused. "I'm no Christian, Derval, but some Christian writing is full of good moral sense." "No such thing," the priest maintained. And this is a work you must already know," the king said, drawing another scroll from its box.
Marcus Aurelius's Meditations. It is an unparalleled guide, my dear Derval, to the manner in which a man should live his life.
Platitudes in bad Greek, written by a Roman boor, the priest growled.
Probably the greatest book ever written,
the king said dreamily, replacing the Marcus Aurelius and drawing out another work.
And this is a curiosity, indeed it is. The great treatise of Aristarchus of Samos. You know it, I'm sure.
No, Lord, I confessed.
It is not perhaps on everyone's reading list, the king admitted sadly. But it has a certain quaint amusement. Aristarchus maintains, do not laugh, that the earth revolves around the sun, and not the sun around the earth.
He illustrated this cantankerous notion with extravagant wheeling gestures with his long arms.
He got it backwards, do you see?
Sounds sensible to me, Selwyn said, still without looking up from his work.
And Silius Italicus.
The king gestured at a whole group of honeycomb cells filled with scrolls.
Dear Silius Italicus, I have all 18 volumes of his History of the Second Punic War, all in verse, of course. What a treasure!
The Second Turgid War, the priest cackled.
Such is my library, Ban said proudly, conducting me from the room. The glory of Innistribes, that and our poets. Sorry to have disturbed you, Father.
Is a camel disturbed by a grasshopper? Father Selwyn demanded. Then the door was closed on him, and I followed the king past the bare-breasted harpist, back to where Blethig waited.
Father Selwyn is conducting research, Ban announced proudly, into the wingspan of angels. Maybe I should ask him about invisibility. He does seem to know everything. But do you see now, Derval, why it is so important that Innistribes does not fall? In this small place, my dear fellow, is stored the wisdom of our world, gathered from its ruins and held in trust. I wonder what a camel is. Do you know what a camel is, Blethig?
A kind of coal, Lord. Blacksmiths used it for making steel.
Do they indeed? How interesting. But coal wouldn't be bothered by a grasshopper, would it? The contingency would scarcely arise, so I suggest it. How perplexing. I must ask Father Selwyn when he's in a mood to be asked, which is not often. Now, young man, I know you've come to save my kingdom, and I'm sure you're eager to be about that business, but first you must stay for supper. My sons are here, warriors both. I had hoped they might devote their lives to poetry and scholarship, but the times demand warriors, do they not? Still, my dear Lancelot values the Fili as highly as I do myself, so there is hope for our future.
He paused, wrinkled his nose, and offered me a kindly smile.
You will, I think, want a bath.
Will I?
Yes, Ban said decisively. Leonore will take you to your chamber, prepare your bath, and provide you with clothes.
He clapped his hands, and the first harpist came to the door. It seemed she was Leonore. I was in a palace by the sea, full of light and beauty, haunted by music, sacred to poetry, and enchanted by its inhabitants, who seemed to me to come from another age and another world. And then I met Lancelot.
"You're hardly more than a child,"
Lancelot said to me. "True, Lord," I said. "I was eating lobster soaked in melted butter, and I do not think before or since I have ever eaten anything so delicious."
"Arthur insults us by sending a mere child," Lancelot insisted.
"Not true, Lord," I said, butter dripping into my beard.
"You accuse me of lying?"
Prince Lancelot, the Edling of Benwick, demanded. I smiled at him. "I accuse you, Lord Prince, of being mistaken."
60 men,
he sneered.
"Is that all Arthur can manage?"
"Yes, Lord," I said.
60 men led by a child," Lancelot said scornfully.
He was only a year or two older than I, yet he possessed the world-weariness of a much older man. He was savagely handsome, tall and well-built, with a narrow, dark-eyed face that was as striking in its maleness as Guinevere's was in its femininity, though there was something disconcertingly serpent-like in Lancelot's aloof looks. He had black hair that he wore in oiled loops, pinned with gold combs. His moustache and beard were neatly trimmed and oiled to a gloss, and he wore a scent that smelled of lavender. He was the best-looking man I ever saw, and worse, he knew it, and I had disliked him from the very first moment I saw him. We met in Ban's feasting hall, which was unlike any feasting hall I was ever in. This one had marble pillars, white curtains that misted the sea view, and smooth plastered walls on which were paintings of gods, goddesses, and fabulous animals. Servants and guards lined the walls of the gracious room, that was lit by a myriad of small bronze dishes, in which wicks floated in oil, while thick beeswax candles burned on the long table, covered by a white cloth, which I was constantly soiling with drips of butter, just as I was smearing the awkward toga that King Ban had insisted I wore to the feast. I was loving the food, and hating the company. Father Selwyn was present, and I would have welcomed a chance to talk with him, but he was annoying one of the 3 poets at the table, all of them members of King Ban's beloved band of Fili, while I was marooned at the table's end with Prince Lancelot. Queen Elaine, who was seated beside her husband, the king, was defending the poets against Selwyn's barbs, which seemed much more amusing than Prince Lancelot's bitter conversation. "Arthur does insult us," Lancelot insisted again. "I am sorry you should think so, Lord," I answered. "Do you never argue, child?" he demanded of me. I looked into his flat, hard eyes. "I thought it unwise for warriors to argue at a feast, Lord Prince," I said. "So, you're a timid child," he sneered. I sighed and lowered my voice. "Do you really want an argument, Lord Prince?" I asked, my patience at last nearing its end. "Because if you do, then just call me a child again and I'll tear your skull off." I smiled. "Child," he said after a heartbeat. I gave him another puzzled look, wondering if he played a game the rules of which I could not guess. But if he did, then the game was in deadly earnest. 10 times the black sword, I said. What? He frowned, not recognizing the Mithraic formula, which meant he was not my brother. "Have you gone mad?" he asked, and then, after a pause, "Are you a mad child, as well as a timid one?" I hit him. I should have kept my temper, but my discomfort and anger overcame all prudence. I gave him a backswing with my elbow that bloodied his nose, cracked his lip, and spilt him backwards off the chair. He sprawled on the floor and tried to swing the fallen chair at me, but I was too fast and too close for the blow to have any force. I kicked the chair aside, hauled him upright, then rammed him backwards against a pillar, where I smashed his head against the stone and put my knee into his groin. He flinched. His mother was screaming, while King Ban and his poetic guests just gaped at me. A nervous, white-cloaked guard put his spear point at my throat. "Take it away," I told the guard, "or you're a dead man." He took it away. "What am I, Lord Prince?" I asked Lancelot. "A child," he said. I put my forearm across his throat, half choking him. He struggled, but he could not shift me. "What am I, Lord?" I asked again. "A child," he croaked. A hand touched my arm, and I turned to see a fair-haired man of my own age smiling at me.